Anthony Chen looked out the airport window at the Skyline Airways plane that would take him to San Francisco. The sleek white and blue jet gleamed in the morning sun. As the CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing airlines, he should have been in the executive lounge enjoying special treatment. Instead, he wore faded jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Just another day, he whispered to himself, adjusting the backpack on his shoulder. For the third time this month, Anthony was flying as a regular passenger on one of his own planes. No special treatment, no first-class seat, no crew knowing the boss was watching. The truth was simple. You can't fix problems you can't see. Now, boarding economy class, rows 20 through 30, called the gate. Agent Anthony checked his boarding pass. Row 24, seat B, middle seat. Perfect. He stood and joined the line of passengers shuffling toward the gate. Behind him, a young mother struggled with a toddler and a mountain of bags. Without hesitation, Anthony turned and offered to help. "Thanks so much," she said, relief washing over her tired face. "Flying alone with kids is like trying to herd cats." "No problem," Anthony replied, taking one of her bags. "I've been there." The truth was he hadn't been there personally, but he'd seen enough passengers struggling to know how hard it could be. This was exactly why he did these secret flights. You can't understand your customers from behind a desk. At the entrance to the plane, flight attendant Diane greeted passengers with a practiced smile. Her eyes slid past Anthony without a flicker of recognition. Good. His disguise was working. "Welcome aboard," she said automatically. Anthony nodded and moved into the cabin. The familiar smell of airplane, a mixture of coffee, cleaning products, and recycled air, filled his lungs. He found his seat and settled in, watching as other passengers boarded. To his right, a businessman in an expensive suit tapped aggressively at his phone screen. To his left, an empty seat waited for its occupant. Anthony tucked his backpack under the seat in front of him. Inside was a small notebook where he recorded observations about the flight experience. Small details mattered. Were the seats comfortable? Was the boarding process efficient? How did the crew treat economy passengers? These questions had become even more important since Anthony had started pushing for major changes at Skyline Airways. For years, the airline industry had been stuck in old ways of thinking, old faces, old ideas. Anthony was determined to bring fresh perspectives to every level of the company. "Excuse me," said a voice. Anthony looked up to see an older woman with gray hair pointing to the empty window seat. He stood to let her in. "Flying to see my grandkids," she explained without being asked. "They grow so fast. Seems like just yesterday. My daughter was their age." "That's nice," Anthony replied with a genuine smile. These little human connections were another reason he valued these undercover trips. As the plane filled, Captain Roger Whitman's voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Whitman speaking. We're looking at clear skies all the way to San Francisco today. Flight time will be approximately 4 hours and 20 minutes. We'll be taking off shortly, so please get comfortable." Anthony had never met Captain Whitman personally. With over 200 pilots in the company, it was impossible to know everyone. But he knew the type. Career pilots who'd been flying since before Anthony was born. Most were excellent at their jobs. Some, however, didn't appreciate the changes Anthony had been making. 6 months ago, Anthony had announced a new hiring initiative aimed at bringing more diversity to their pilot ranks. The data was clear. While nearly 80% of their passengers were diverse in background, race, and gender, their pilots were overwhelmingly from one demographic. That didn't make business sense, and it didn't reflect the communities they served. The initiative had been met with mixed reactions. Many employees embraced the change. Others grumbled about lowering standards, despite the fact that every single pilot, regardless of background, had to meet the exact same qualification requirements. Anthony took out his phone to check one last email before takeoff. It was from Li Wei, his chief of operations. "Final numbers are in," the email read. "New pilot training program has 48% diverse candidates, all exceeding qualification requirements. Old guard still pushing back. Might need your direct intervention soon." Anthony sighed and put his phone in airplane mode. Change was never easy, especially in an industry steeped in tradition. But he wasn't going to back down. Excellence came in all forms. and Skyline Airways was going to lead the industry in recognizing that fact. The plane began pushing back from the gate. Flight attendant Diane demonstrated the safety features with practiced movements. Anthony watched, carefully. Did economy passengers get the same level of attention as those in first class? So far, things looked good. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Anthony settled deeper into his seat. The businessman beside him had finally put away his phone and was now flipping through the in-flight magazine with obvious boredom. The older woman by the window watched the airport scenery slide by with childlike fascination. "I never get tired of takeoffs," she confided to Anthony. "That moment when you feel the earth let go of you. It's magic every time." Anthony nodded in agreement. Despite hundreds of flights, he still felt that same magic. It reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with the airline industry in the first place. Not just the engineering marvel of flight, but the human experience of it. Bringing people to loved ones, connecting business partners, opening new worlds to travelers. The engines roared to life, pushing everyone gently back in their seats as the plane accelerated down the runway. Within moments, they were airborne, Chicago falling away beneath them. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Flight attendants began preparing for beverage service. Anthony observed everything with a careful eye. How long did it take? Were passengers in all sections treated with equal courtesy? 20 minutes into the flight, Anthony opened his laptop. He had a presentation to prepare for next week's board meeting. The airline was expanding, adding new routes to underserved communities. It was a bold move in a competitive industry, but Anthony believed strongly that growth came from seeing opportunities others missed. The beverage cart reached his row. Flight attendant Diane, now more relaxed than during boarding, offered drinks with a warmer smile. "Coffee, please," Anthony said. "Black." "Here you go, sir," she replied, handing him a cup. No recognition crossed her face. "Perfect." Anthony sipped his coffee and continued working. The cabin hummed with quiet conversation and the white noise of engines. This was the rhythm of flight that he loved. Hundreds of people suspended in the sky, each with their own story, all temporarily sharing this metal tube hurling through the atmosphere. Around him, he noticed details that would never appear in official reports. A flight attendant spending extra time helping an elderly passenger with his meal tray. Another discreetly giving a coloring book to a restless child. These small human moments were the true measure of service quality. An hour into the flight, Anthony closed his laptop and pulled out the latest issue of Aviation Weekly. The cover story featured Skyline Airways and its bold new direction. The article quoted anonymous sources within the company, some praising the changes, others criticizing them. Anthony wasn't surprised by the pushback. In his experience, those with the most privilege often felt most threatened by efforts to level the playing field. The older woman beside him noticed the magazine. "My late husband was a pilot," she said. "Flew for 30 years. Back then it was a different world. He used to say the cockpit was no place for certain types of people." Anthony raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I always told him he was wrong," she continued. "Our granddaughter wants to be a pilot now. Smart as a whip, that girl. Why shouldn't she have the same chance he did?" Anthony smiled. "No reason at all," he said. "Times change, usually for the better." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her book. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing the seatbelt sign to ding on. Captain Whitman's voice came over the intercom again. "Folks, we're hitting some rough air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts until we're through this patch." Anthony secured his belt and looked around. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, checking on passengers. The businessman beside him gripped the armrests tightly, knuckles white. Not a comfortable flyer, apparently. "It's just like driving over bumps in the road," Anthony offered reassuringly. The man gave a tight smile. "I know, just never got used to it." As the plane bounced through the turbulence, Anthony reflected on his journey to becoming CEO. 20 years ago, he'd started as a baggage handler, working his way through college. Back then, few people who looked like him held positions of power in the industry. Each step up the ladder had required twice the effort, twice the results, twice the resilience. Now that he had reached the top, he was determined to make the climb easier for others. Not by lowering standards, but by removing artificial barriers, by recognizing talent in all its forms, by creating a company that reflected the world it served. The turbulence subsided, and the flight continued smoothly. Anthony finished his magazine and returned to his laptop. 3 more hours to San Francisco. 3 more hours to observe, to learn, to understand the real experience of flying Skyline Airways. Little did he know that this routine undercover flight was about to become anything but routine. The flight had settled into the peaceful rhythm that comes about 2 hours into a cross-country journey. Anthony Chen had just finished reviewing some emails on his laptop when the drink cart made its second pass through the cabin. The flight attendant, Diane, according to her name tag, offered him another coffee. "Yes, please," Anthony said with a smile. "The first cup is what gets you going, the second cup is what keeps you going." Diane laughed. "That's exactly right. Cream or sugar?" "Black is fine, thanks." As she handed him the steaming cup, the plane gave a slight shudder. Nothing alarming, just the gentle reminder that they were, in fact, hurtling through the atmosphere in a metal tube. The businessman next to Anthony gripped his armrests again. "Not a big deal," Anthony reassured him. "Probably. Just a change in the air currents." The man nodded but didn't loosen his grip. Anthony checked his watch. Another 2 hours until they landed in San Francisco. He had a driver scheduled to pick him up, not as the CEO but as a regular business traveler. He wanted to experience the entire customer journey from booking to baggage claim. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Whitman speaking." Anthony took a sip of his coffee and half listened to what he expected would be a routine announcement about their flight path or weather conditions. "We're cruising at 36,000 feet now, and we've got clear skies ahead all the way to San Francisco. Current temperature at our destination is 65 degrees with light winds. We should be landing right on schedule at 1:45 p.m. local time. Standard information, nothing unusual." Anthony returned his attention to the spreadsheet on his laptop screen, but then the captain's voice continued, his tone shifting subtly. "While I have your attention, I'd like to share something with all of you today." Anthony's head lifted. This was definitely not part of the script. "I've been flying for Skyline Airways for 28 years now. Started back when we had just 12 planes in our fleet. Back then we hired pilots based on just one thing: who could fly the plane best." The cabin had grown quiet. Even the businessman beside Anthony seemed to forget his anxiety about flying, his attention now fixed on the overhead speakers. "These days, though, things are different at our airline. Now we're more concerned with checking boxes, with making sure we have the right mix of people in the cockpit, if you know what I mean." Anthony felt his stomach tighten. He set his coffee down carefully, trying to process what he was hearing. "Don't get me wrong," the captain continued, his voice taking on a bitter edge. "I'm all for giving everyone a fair chance. But when it comes to who's flying your plane, who's responsible for your safety, wouldn't you rather have the best person for the job, not just someone who fills a quota?" A few passengers nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Anthony sat perfectly still, scarcely breathing. "The thing is," Captain Whitman went on, apparently unaware that what had started as an announcement had turned into a personal grievance session, "some of us who've dedicated our lives to this airline are being pushed aside, passed over for promotion, told we need to make room for new perspectives, as if experience doesn't matter anymore." Flight attendant Diane had frozen in the aisle, drink cart forgotten, her face a mask of professional horror. She made a small motion toward the cockpit door but seemed unsure of what to do. "Our new CEO, hired because he checked certain boxes himself, if you ask me, has been pushing this agenda hard, talking about how our pilot ranks need to reflect our passengers. Well, I don't know about you, but when I'm having surgery, I don't care if my doctor looks like me. I care if they're the best surgeon available." Anthony felt heat rising in his face. He glanced around the cabin, wondering if anyone recognized him. if anyone would make the connection. But his baseball cap and casual clothes seemed to be doing their job. He was just another passenger, listening to this shocking breach of professionalism. The captain's voice lowered, as if he was no longer speaking to the entire plane, but to someone else in the cockpit. I mean, Tom, you've seen the new batch of pilots coming through training. Half of them wouldn't have made the cut 5 years ago, but now we've got to smile and welcome them because the big boss says so. There was a muffled sound, as if someone else in the cockpit was speaking urgently. Then Captain Whitman's voice came back, suddenly professional again. We're expecting some light turbulence in about 15 minutes as we pass over the Rockies. We'll keep the seatbelt sign on as a precaution. Thank you for your attention. The intercom clicked off. The cabin remained silent for several long seconds. Then, like a wave, conversation resumed. Hushed at first, then louder as passengers turned to each other to discuss what they'd just heard. "Can you believe that?" the older woman by the window whispered to Anthony. "In all my years of flying, I've never heard a pilot say anything like that." Anthony managed a tight nod. "Quite unprofessional," he said, his voice carefully controlled. Across the aisle, a young black girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, looked up at her father with confusion in her eyes. "Dad, what did he mean?" she asked. Her father leaned down and spoke quietly to her. Anthony couldn't hear the words, but he could see the careful, measured way the man spoke. The way parents do when explaining an ugly truth to a child who is old enough to notice but too young to fully understand. Flight attendant Diane had recovered her composure and was now moving quickly toward the front of the plane, likely to address the situation with the captain. As she passed Anthony's row, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. Anthony took a deep breath and reached for his phone. He switched it back on, ignoring the usual warnings about keeping devices in airplane mode. This was an emergency of a different kind. He opened his contacts and scrolled to find Li Wei, his chief of operations. His fingers hovered over the screen as he considered what to write. How do you summarize what just happened? How do you convey the shock, the anger, the deep disappointment? Finally, he typed, "On flight SL-342, Captain Whitman just went on rant over intercom about diversity initiatives. Unprofessional, inappropriate, harmful to passengers. Recording sent separately. Need immediate action plan for when we land." He hit send, then opened his voice recorder app and saved what he'd managed to capture of the captain's comments. The quality wasn't great. The intercom had distorted the sound, but it was clear enough. The businessman beside Anthony let out a low whistle. "That guy just talked himself out of a job," he said. "Can't believe he said all that to a plane full of people." Anthony nodded, not trusting himself to speak further on the matter. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Captain Whitman had no idea that the very CEO he was criticizing, the one he accused of being a box-checking hire, was sitting in row 24 hearing every word. His phone buzzed with a response from Li Wei. "This is unacceptable. Do you want us to have someone meet the flight? Airport security can remove him from duty immediately." Anthony considered this option. It would send a strong message. It would demonstrate that such behavior had immediate consequences. But it would also create a scene, potentially turning an already bad situation into a public spectacle. He replied, "No, let him complete the flight. I'll handle it personally when we land. Alert HR to prepare appropriate documentation, and have someone from PR standing by. This could leak to social media." "Understood," came the swift reply. "Do you want to reveal yourself or handle this incognito?" An interesting question. Anthony looked around the cabin again. The passengers had mostly returned to their own activities, though the mood remained subdued. Diane was back at her drink cart, continuing service with forced cheerfulness. "We'll stay undercover for now," he wrote back. "More valuable to observe fallout. We'll reveal identity when confronting Captain." With that decision made, Anthony put his phone away and tried to focus on his spreadsheet again. But the numbers blurred before his eyes. All he could think about was that young girl across the aisle, asking her father what the captain meant. What lasting impression would this flight leave on her? What message had she received about her own potential, her own worth? The thought made his jaw clench. 20 minutes later, the promised turbulence arrived. The plane bounced and shuddered as it passed through rough air. The businessman beside Anthony white-knuckled his way through it, while the older woman by the window merely closed her eyes and seemed to doze. Anthony barely noticed the physical discomfort. His mind was racing, planning his approach for when they landed. As CEO, he had faced many challenging situations: budget crises, PR disasters, tough negotiations with unions and suppliers. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that cut deep. He had worked his entire career to reach a position where he could make meaningful change, where he could open doors that had been closed to people like him. And now, one bitter man with a microphone had just reminded him how fragile that progress could be. The turbulence subsided, but tension lingered in the cabin. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with tight smiles. Passengers spoke in hushed tones. No one mentioned the captain's outburst directly, but it hung in the air like an invisible cloud. Anthony's phone buzzed again. Another message from Lee Wei. Airport manager notified of situation. Will provide private room for meeting post-flight. Captain Whitman's file pulled for review. Note: 3 previous complaints about resistance to company culture in last 6 months. 3 previous complaints. This wasn't an isolated incident then. This was a pattern of behavior that had been building, perhaps for years. Someone had noticed, had documented concerns, but no decisive action had been taken. That would change today. Anthony closed his laptop and tucked it into his backpack. He wasn't going to get any more work done on this flight. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook and began writing. Not notes about the flight experience as he'd originally planned, but ideas for addressing the larger issue at hand. This incident, painful as it was, offered an opportunity. A chance to demonstrate in clear terms what kind of company Skyline Airways was going to be moving forward. A chance to show every employee, from baggage handlers to board members, that certain behaviors simply wouldn't be tolerated, regardless of seniority or skill. By the time the captain announced their initial descent into San Francisco, Anthony had filled several pages with notes. Beside him, the businessman had finally relaxed enough to doze off, while the older woman was gathering her belongings. Quite a flight, wasn't it? She said, catching Anthony's eye. Yes, he agreed. Not one I'll forget anytime soon. You know, she said, leaning closer. My husband would have said the same things the captain did once upon a time. People get stuck in their ways of thinking. They see change as a threat rather than progress. Anthony nodded. It's human nature, I suppose. Maybe, she replied. But that doesn't make it right. My granddaughter wants to be a pilot, like I told you. She's smart, determined, works twice as hard as anyone else. But men like that captain, they'd never see past the color of her skin or the fact she's a girl. They'd only see what she isn't, not what she is. Anthony felt a lump in his throat. Your granddaughter sounds remarkable, he said. I hope she gets her chance. Oh, she will, the woman said with firm confidence. The world is changing, no matter how much some people fight it. The question is just how much unnecessary pain we cause along the way. The plane banked, beginning its approach to San Francisco International Airport. Below them, the city spread out in a magnificent panorama. The iconic Golden Gate Bridge, the bay gleaming in the afternoon sun, skyscrapers reaching toward the clouds. A beautiful sight, but Anthony barely noticed it. His mind was already at the gate, already in that private room where he would come face to face with Captain Whitman. He imagined the shock on the man's face when he realized who had been sitting in economy class, hearing every word of his rant. But what would happen next? Firing the captain would be the easy response, the expected response. But would it solve the underlying problem? Would it change minds or just drive resentment deeper? As the wheels touched down on the runway, Anthony made his decision. This wouldn't be just about punishment. It would be about transformation. For Captain Whitman, for Skyline Airways, and for that young girl across the aisle who deserved to dream without limits. The plane taxied to the gate. and passengers began the familiar routine of gathering belongings and forming the impatient queue in the aisle. Anthony remained seated, waiting for most of the crowd to clear. He texted Li Wei one final time. "Landing now. Ready for meeting. Make sure Captain Whitman comes alone." Then he put away his phone, adjusted his baseball cap, and prepared to step out of the shadows. The seatbelt sign dinged off. All around Anthony, passengers rose from their seats, reaching for bags in overhead compartments, stretching stiff limbs, and forming the inevitable logjam in the aisle. Anthony remained seated, watching the cabin empty around him. He was in no rush. In fact, he needed to be one of the last passengers off the plane. His phone buzzed with a text from Li Wei. "Private room secured. Airport manager standing by, Captain." Unaware of situation, Anthony sent back a quick thanks and pocketed his phone. Across the aisle, the young black girl and her father were gathering their things. The girl still looked troubled, her earlier excitement about flying now dimmed. Her father placed a protective hand on her shoulder as they shuffled toward the exit. As they passed Anthony's row, he heard the girl ask, "Dad, could I really not be a pilot because of how I look?" Her father stopped, crouching down to meet her eyes. "Listen to me," he said firmly but gently. "You can be anything you set your mind to. Don't let anyone tell you different. Not ever." The girl nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. Anthony felt a renewed surge of anger, followed by determination. This was exactly why his work mattered. This was why changing the culture at Skyline Airways wasn't just about fairness in hiring. It was about changing what people believed was possible. When most of the passengers had deplaned, Anthony finally stood, retrieved his backpack from under the seat, and made his way toward the front. Flight attendant Diane stood near the exit, saying goodbye to the last few travelers. Her smile looked strained, her eyes worried. "Thank you for flying with us today," she said automatically as Anthony approached. He paused. "Tough flight," he commented quietly. Diane's professional mask slipped momentarily. "I'm so sorry about what happened," she whispered. "That's not what our airline stands for." "I know," Anthony replied, with more meaning than she could understand. He moved past her into the jet bridge, then stopped just out of sight of the A cabin. He pulled out his phone and checked his appearance. Baseball cap still in place, casual clothes still unremarkable, nothing that screamed CEO. Perfect. A text from Li Wei confirmed that Captain Whitman would be headed to gate office A42 for what he believed was a routine post-flight check-in. Anthony made his way there, moving against the flow of arriving passengers, his mind rehearsing various approaches to the coming confrontation. Direct termination? A formal warning? Something more creative? Each option had merits and drawbacks. The CEO part of him wanted swift, decisive action to send a clear message throughout the company. But another part, the part that had once been a baggage handler working his way through college, facing skepticism at every step up the ladder, wondered if there was a more transformative path. At gate A42, a stern-faced woman in an airport management uniform stood waiting. Her name badge identified her as Kelly Thompson. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, offering her hand. "I'm Kelly, the terminal manager. We've prepared the room as requested." "Thank you, Kelly. Has the captain arrived?" "Yet?" "Not yet. He's completing final checks. Should be here in about 10 minutes." Anthony nodded. "I'd like to speak with him alone initially. Could you ensure we're not disturbed?" "Of course," Kelly replied. "Whatever you need." She led him to a small conference room just off the main concourse. It was plain but private. A table, 6 chairs, a coffee machine in the corner. A window overlooked the tarmac where their plane sat, now being serviced for its next journey. "Coffee?" Kelly offered. "Please." As she poured him a cup, Kelly hesitated. "Mr. Chen, if I may, we've had a few passengers stop by the service desk already, wanting to file complaints about what happened on that flight." Anthony wasn't surprised. "How many?" "7 so far, and it's been mentioned on social media. It's starting to get attention. This complicated things. What had been a private company matter was rapidly becoming public. The stakes were rising by the minute. "Thank you for letting me know," Anthony said. "Please direct any inquiries to our PR team for now. And could you have someone keep an eye on how this is developing online?" "Already on it," Kelly assured him, setting down his coffee. "I'll let you know when the captain arrives." Left alone, Anthony took a moment to center himself. The coffee was surprisingly good for airport brew. He sipped it slowly, staring out at the plane that had just carried him across the country. The plane where Captain Whitman had chosen to air his grievances to a captive audience. On the surface, this situation was straightforward. An employee had violated company policy. He had made statements that contradicted the airline's values. He had created a hostile environment for passengers and crew alike. Standard procedure called for immediate suspension, followed by a formal review, likely ending in termination. But Anthony hadn't built Skyline Airways into an industry leader by following standard procedures. He'd done it by seeing opportunities where others saw only problems, by finding unexpected paths forward, by believing that people could change given the right motivation and support. His phone buzzed with another text from Lee Wei. Social media. Catching fire. 3 videos of incident uploaded. National news picking up story. PR team drafting statement. Need your approval ASAP. Anthony grimaced. The window for a quiet resolution was closing fast. He quickly reviewed the draft statement Lee Wei had attached, made a few edits, and sent it back with approval to release. The statement acknowledged the incident, expressed regret, affirmed the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion, and promised appropriate action. What it didn't specify was what that appropriate action would be. Anthony still hadn't decided. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Kelly poked her head in. "Captain Whitman is here," she said. Anthony took a deep breath. "Send him in, please." Captain Roger Whitman strode into the room with the confidence of a man who'd spent decades in comedy. Tall and trim despite his 60-some years, he wore his uniform with military precision. Every button fastened, every crease sharp. His silver hair was cut short, his jaw clean-shaven. He looked exactly like what most people imagined when they thought airline pilot. What he didn't look like was a man who expected trouble. His expression was neutral, perhaps slightly curious about this unusual post-flight meeting. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, glancing at Anthony with mild confusion. Clearly, he didn't recognize the casually dressed man as anyone of importance. "Yes, Captain Whitman, please have a seat." Anthony gestured to the chair across from him. Whitman sat, his posture perfect, hands resting lightly on the table. "Is there a problem with the flight log?" The dispatcher said something about a meeting, but wasn't specific. Anthony studied him, for a moment, trying to reconcile this professional demeanor with the bitter voice that had filled the cabin just hours ago. "Do you know who I am, Captain?" Whitman frowned slightly, looking more closely at Anthony. "Should I?" Anthony removed his baseball cap. "My name is Anthony Chen. I'm the CEO of Skyline Airways." The change in Whitman's expression was immediate and dramatic. His face paled, his eyes widened, and his perfect posture faltered as he instinctively leaned back as if trying to put physical distance between himself and this revelation. "Mr. Chen," he stammered. I wasn't expecting... That is, I didn't realize that I was on your flight today," Anthony finished for him. "In row 24, economy class, where I heard every word of your announcement." Whitman swallowed hard. The implications were clearly sinking in. "Sir, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Anthony cut in, his voice level but firm. "And I'm going to give you that opportunity, but first I want to make sure we're both clear about what happened today. You used the aircraft intercom, a system meant for safety information and passenger updates, to voice personal grievances about company policy. You criticized diversity initiatives. You suggested that some of our newer pilots are less qualified because of their backgrounds. And you directly disparaged me, your CEO, to a plane full of customers." Whitman's face had gone from pale to flushed. "Sir, I'm not finished," Anthony continued calmly. What you may not have realized is the impact your words had on those passengers. Did you see the young black girl in row 25? After your announcement, she asked her father if she couldn't be a pilot because of how she looks. Did you see the Asian family in first class who suddenly became very interested in their books when other passengers glanced their way? Did you notice how flight attendant Diane had to keep working with a smile plastered on her face while feeling humiliated by your comments? Whitman looked down at his hands, which were now clasped tightly together. And that's just what I personally observed, Anthony went on. What I couldn't see was how many other passengers felt unwelcome or uncomfortable because of your words. How many people wondering if Skyline Airways is a company that shares your views? The room fell silent. Outside, planes taxied across the tarmac. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window. Finally, Whitman spoke. Am I being fired? He asked quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. It was the obvious question, the expected outcome. Anthony took a sip of his coffee, considering his answer carefully. That depends, he said at last. Tell me, Captain Whitman, in your 28 years with this airline, have you ever made a mistake in the cockpit? Whitman looked up, clearly thrown by this change of direction. Of course, every pilot has. And when you made those mistakes, what happened? They were addressed, corrected. Were you fired for them? No, sir. Not for honest mistakes that didn't compromise safety. Anthony nodded. Because in aviation we understand that even the best professionals make errors. What matters is how we respond to those errors. Whether we learn from them. Whether we commit to doing better. Whitman was watching him intently now, a flicker of hope crossing his features. What you did today was a serious error in judgment, Anthony continued. It violated company policy. It undermined our values. It harmed our passengers and our brand. By any standard, it warrants termination. Whitman's shoulders slumped. However, Anthony said, I'm wondering if there might be a more productive path forward. One that would benefit not just you, but our entire company. Perhaps even our industry. Confusion replaced resignation on Whitman's face. I don't understand. Anthony leaned forward. Here's what I'm proposing. Instead of firing you today, I'm offering you a choice. Option 1 is straightforward. You resign immediately, we provide a standard severance package, and you walk away. Clean break. And option 2? Whitman asked cautiously. Option 2 is more demanding, Anthony explained. You accept a 6-month probation. During that time, you work directly with our diversity and inclusion team. You participate in developing training programs that address the very biases you displayed today. You mentor 3 of our newest pilots who come from backgrounds different from your own. And you help me build a Skyline Airways where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Whitman stared at him, clearly struggling to process this unexpected turn. You'd give me a second chance? After what I said? After what I said about you? Anthony held his gaze steadily. This isn't about me, Captain. It's about the kind of company we want to be. The kind of industry we want to build. And yes, it's about that girl in row 25 who deserves to dream without limits. The room fell silent again as Whitman absorbed the offer. Outside, a plane roared down the runway, lifting into the afternoon sky, a reminder of the miraculous work they did every day, bringing people together across vast distances. Why? Whitman asked finally. Why not just fire me and be done with it? Most CEOs would. Anthony considered the question. Because firing you would be easy. It would make a statement, certainly, but it wouldn't change minds. It wouldn't address the underlying issues, and ultimately it wouldn't move us forward. He paused. Plus, you're an excellent pilot with decades of experience. That has value. I'd rather redirect that value than lose it entirely. Whitman nodded, slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. And if I choose option 2 but fail to meet your expectations? Then we part ways, Anthony said simply. But at least we'll both know we tried something more meaningful than the easy solution. 4. The first time since entering the room, Whitman's posture relaxed slightly. "May I have some time to consider?" "You have until tomorrow morning," Anthony replied, rising from his chair. "Either way, you're suspended for the next 2 weeks. I suggest you use that time to reflect on the impact of your actions today, not just on your career, but on every person who heard your words." He extended his hand across the table. After a moment's hesitation, Whitman stood and shook it. "I never thought I'd meet the CEO like this," Whitman said, a hint of genuine regret in his voice. "Neither did I," Anthony replied. "But sometimes, the most important conversations happen when we least expect them." As he left the room, Anthony felt the weight of the day's events pressing on him. The angry words over the intercom, the hurt expression on that young girl's face, the decisions still to be made. His phone buzzed again. Leeway. PR statement released. Board members calling for updates. How did the meeting go? Anthony texted back as he walked through the terminal. Gave him a choice, resignation or transformation. We'll know his decision tomorrow. Either way, this isn't over, it's just beginning. Outside, the California sun was bright and warm on his face. Anthony paused, looking up at the clear blue sky where dozens of planes traced white lines across the vast expanse, each one carrying hundreds of stories, hundreds of dreams. One difficult conversation wouldn't change everything. One incident wouldn't transform an industry overnight. But it was a start. A moment when words spoken in ignorance could become a catalyst for growth, when a mistake could lead to a mission. Anthony hailed a taxi. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But today, he had planted a seed that might, with care and attention, grow into something remarkable. Anthony Chen woke before his alarm the next morning. The San Francisco sunrise was just beginning to paint the sky outside his hotel window. He lay still for a moment, watching the light change, thinking about the day ahead. By now, the incident on Flight SL-342 had spread widely. His phone had buzzed constantly yesterday evening with updates from the PR team, messages from board members, and links to news stories with headlines like "Airline Pilot's Biased Rant Caught on Camera" and "Skyline Airways Under Fire After Captain's Controversial Announcement." The company's social media accounts were flooded with comments, some expressing outrage, others defending the captain, many asking what Skyline Airways planned to do about it. A few passengers had given interviews to local news stations. The young girl's father had spoken eloquently about having to explain discrimination to his daughter. Anthony reached for his phone, scrolling through overnight updates. The story had made national morning news shows. Several major corporations had publicly stated they would review their business travel arrangements with Skyline Airways. Competitor airlines were carefully distancing themselves, issuing statements about their own diversity commitments. A text from Leeway arrived. Captain Whitman called. Wants to meet at 9 a.m., says he's my aim. Aid his decision. Anthony texted back. Book conference room at headquarters, I want him on our turf. He showered and dressed with care, choosing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and blue tie with the Skyline Airways logo, subtly woven into the pattern. Today wasn't about blending in. Today was about standing firmly as the leader of a company at a crossroads. Over breakfast in the hotel restaurant, Anthony reviewed the latest draft of a company-wide email addressing the incident. The words felt hollow, corporate. He pushed it aside and started fresh, typing directly into his phone. Yesterday, one of our captains used our aircraft intercom to express views that do not reflect who we are as a company. Many of you have seen the videos. Many of you have read the news stories. Many of you are wondering what happens next. Today, I want to be clear. Skyline Airways stands for excellence, safety, and respect. Respect for every passenger, every employee, and every community we serve. We believe talent comes in all forms. We believe diversity makes us stronger. And we believe actions speak louder than words. In the coming days, you'll see exactly what those actions look like. But this moment isn't just about one incident or one employee. It's about all of us. About the culture we create together. About the example we set for our industry. I'm asking each of you to join me in reaffirming our commitment to these values, not just in policy documents, but in daily actions, in how we treat each other, in how we serve our customers, in how we build our future together. More details will follow. For now, know that I see this as an opportunity for Skyline Airways to lead, to show the world what it looks like when a company turns a challenge into meaningful change. He read it over, made a few small edits, and sent it to Leeway to distribute to all employees at noon after his meeting with Captain Whitman. The taxi ride to Skyline Airways headquarters took Anthony through morning rush hour traffic. Outside his window, the city was coming alive, people hurrying to work, stopping for coffee, living their normal Tuesday lives, unaware of the storm brewing in the executive suite of the gleaming glass building that served as Skyline's West. Coast Hub. Leeway was waiting in the lobby, tablet in hand, expression serious. Tall and elegant in a tailored pantsuit, she had been Anthony's right hand since he became CEO 3 years ago. Her calm efficiency had helped navigate countless crises, though none quite like this. "Good morning," she said, falling into step beside him as they headed for the elevators. "Quite the media circus out there." Anthony nodded. "Status update?" "Stock price opened down 4%. 6 corporate clients have called asking for reassurance about our values. The board chair wants a briefing at 11. The flight attendants union has issued a statement supporting management's right to address the situation appropriately, and Captain Whitman arrived 10 minutes ago. He's waiting in conference room A." "How does he seem?" Anthony asked as they stepped into the elevator. Leeway considered this. "Subdued, different from the man I met at last year's holiday party. Less certain of himself." "Good," Anthony said quietly. "Certainty can be the enemy of growth." When they reached the executive floor, Anthony paused before the conference room door. "I'd like to meet with him alone initially," he told Leeway. "But stay close. We'll need you for the next steps, whatever he decides." Leeway nodded and took a seat in the adjacent waiting area, already focused on her tablet, managing the dozen other crises that had been pushed aside to deal with this one. Anthony straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Captain." Whitman stood as he entered. The pilot looked like he hadn't slept much, his normally immaculate uniform slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. But his back was straight, his chin up. Whatever decision he'd made, he was prepared to deliver it with dignity. "Mr. Chen," he said, offering his hand. Anthony shook it firmly. "Captain Whitman, please sit down." They settled at opposite sides of the polished conference table. Through the large windows behind Whitman, San Francisco Bay gleamed in the morning sun. On clear days like this, you could see planes taking off and landing at the airport across the water, silver specks carrying thousands of people to destinations near and far. "I've made my decision," Whitman said without preamble. Anthony nodded but said nothing, giving the pilot space to continue. "Before I tell you what it is," Whitman went on, "I want to say something." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "What I did yesterday was inexcusable. I violated the trust placed in me as a captain. I embarrassed my crew, my airline, and myself. There's no justification for it." "I appreciate that recognition," Anthony said quietly. "I've spent most of the night thinking about why I did it," Whitman continued. "About what pushed me to that point. And I realize now it wasn't really about company policy or diversity initiatives. It was about fear." Anthony leaned forward slightly, intrigued by this unexpected turn. "I've been flying for almost 30 years, Whitman explained. "It's not just what I do, it's who I am. The thought of becoming irrelevant terrifies me. When I see all these new pilots coming in, younger, from different backgrounds with different perspectives, part of me worries there's no place for someone like me anymore." He gave a rueful smile. "That sounds pathetic when I say it out loud." "It sounds human," Anthony countered. "Change is difficult for everyone, Captain Whitman. Even necessary change. Even good change. Whitman nodded slowly. Last night, my daughter called me. She'd seen the videos online. She was disappointed in me. Said I'd taught her better than that. And she was right. He paused. She asked me what I planned to do about it. If I was going to just walk away or try to make things right. Anthony waited, sensing there was more. My daughter's a software engineer, Whitman continued. When she was in college, her professor told her that women just weren't as good at coding as men, that she should consider a different field. You know what she did? She graduated top of her class, proved him wrong. Pride and regret mingled in his voice. And here I am 20 years later, sounding just like that professor. A moment of silence stretched between them. Outside, a plane traced a white line across the blue sky. I want option 2, Whitman said finally. The probation, the mentoring, the chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. He met Anthony's gaze directly. If you'll still have me. Anthony studied him carefully, looking for any sign of insincerity. He saw none, only a man facing a hard truth about himself and choosing the harder path forward. It won't be easy, Anthony warned. There will be people who think you should have been fired, who won't trust that you can change, who will be watching for any sign that this is just for show. I know, Whitman acknowledged. I'll have to earn back trust every day. I'm prepared for that. Anthony nodded slowly. Then we have a deal. He extended his hand across the table. Whitman shook it firmly. Thank you for this chance, Mr. Chen. I won't let you down. Call me Anthony, he replied. We're going to be working closely together for the next 6 months. The tension in the room eased slightly as both men settled back in their chairs. So what happens now? Whitman asked. Anthony pressed a button on the conference phone. Li Wei, could you join us, please? Moments later, Li Wei entered, tablet in hand, her expression professionally neutral. Captain Whitman has chosen option 2, Anthony informed her. We'll need to set up the formal probation paperwork, schedule his integration with the diversity team, and select 3 appropriate mentees from our newest pilot class. Li Wei nodded, making notes. And the public response? Anthony considered this. The easy approach would be a standard press release announcing disciplinary action against the unnamed employee involved. Clean, corporate, forgettable. But there was an opportunity here for something more meaningful, something that might actually move the needle on the larger issues at play. I think we need to go bigger, he said finally. Captain, how would you feel about participating in a more public response? Not just an internal company matter, but something that addresses the industry as a whole. Whitman looked startled. What did you have in mind? A joint statement. You and I together, acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility, and announcing a new initiative at Skyline Airways, a program focused on mentorship and inclusion, with you as one of its founding members. You want me to be the public face of this? Whitman asked, clearly surprised. After what I did? Not the only face, Anthony clarified. But an important one. It's powerful when someone acknowledges a mistake and commits to change. More powerful than just punishing them and moving on. Li Wei was typing rapidly on her tablet. This could work, she said. It's unexpected, authentic. It could shift the narrative from airline has biased pilot to airline transforms incident into industry-leading program. Whitman still looked uncertain. The media would eat me alive. Some would try, Anthony acknowledged. But others would respect the courage it takes to stand up and say, I was wrong, and here's how I'm working to do better. That's not a story we hear often enough. He leaned forward. Look, Captain, what you said on that flight hurt people. It reinforced stereotypes that have held too many talented individuals back for too long. Nothing can undo that completely. But what if your next act could help break down those same barriers? What if your journey could help others see possibilities they hadn't considered before? Whitman was quiet for a long moment, considering. My daughter would be proud, he said finally. And that means a lot to me. He straightened his shoulders. All right, I'm in. Whatever you need me to do. Anthony smiled for the first time that morning. Excellent. Wei, could you set up a meeting with the PR team for this afternoon and reach out to our pilot training department about selecting appropriate mentees for Captain Whitman? Already on it, she replied, fingers flying over her tablet. And I've messaged HR about the paperwork. Perfect. Anthony turned back to Whitman. The next few weeks won't be easy, Captain. There will be tough conversations, hard truths to face, perhaps even some anger to navigate. Are you ready for that? Whitman nodded firmly. Yes, sir, I've spent my career training for emergencies in the cockpit. Time to apply some of that same discipline to this situation. Good man. Anthony stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Wei will work with you on next steps. I have a board briefing to prepare for. As Whitman rose to leave, he paused. Mr. Chen. Anthony, there's something I've been wondering. Yesterday, when you revealed who you were, you could have fired me on the spot, made an example of me. Why didn't you? Anthony considered the question carefully. Because I've been on the receiving end of comments like yours throughout my career, he said finally. I've seen what happens when people are simply punished for their biases rather than challenged to examine them. The punishment might feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely leads to real change. He moved toward the window, looking out at the planes crossing the sky. This industry has been slow to evolve, Captain. Too slow. If we're going to build the kind of airline, the kind of world, where everyone has a fair chance to succeed, we need to do more than just remove the obstacles. We need to transform them into stepping stones. Whitman nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Like turning an old, biased pilot into an advocate for change? Anthony smiled. Precisely. After Whitman had left with Wei, Anthony remained at the window, watching the planes come and go. Each one represented hundreds of lives temporarily, entrusted to Skyline Airways. People of every background, every identity, every dream. His phone buzzed with a text from Wei. Just heard from that father who was on yesterday's flight. His daughter would like to visit our pilot training facility. Says she's thinking about flight school when she's older. Anthony smiled. Perhaps some good would come from this after all. Perhaps this unexpected turbulence would lead to clearer skies ahead. He turned away from the window and headed for his office. There was much work to be done. 6 months later, Anthony Chen stood at the back of Skyline Airways' largest training facility, watching as Captain Roger Whitman addressed a room full of employees. The space buzzed with energy, flight attendants, ground crew, pilots both veteran and newly minted all gathered for the official launch of the company's Wingspan initiative. 6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake, Whitman was saying, his voice clear and steady. I let fear and bias speak through me. I said things that hurt people, passengers, colleagues, and the entire Skyline family. He paused, scanning the faces before him. What I didn't realize that day was that my CEO was sitting in economy class, hearing every word. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. The story had become something of a legend within the company. How Anthony had been flying incognito, how he'd confronted Whitman, how they'd turned a potential PR disaster into something transformative. I expected to be fired, Whitman continued. I deserved to be fired. Instead, Mr. Chen offered me something much harder than punishment. He offered me the chance to grow, to learn, to be part of building a better Skyline Airways. Anthony watched Whitman closely. The change in the man over these 6 months had been remarkable. Gone was the defensive, fearful pilot who'd lashed out over the intercom. In his place stood someone more thoughtful, more open, more aware of his impact on others. It hadn't been an easy journey. There had been tense moments in diversity training sessions, uncomfortable conversations with the 3 young pilots assigned as his mentees, and more than a few nights of soul-searching. Anthony knew this because Whitman had documented it all, in weekly reports, in frank discussions with the executive team, and in the journal he'd started keeping as part of his personal growth process. Today, we're launching the Wingspan initiative, Whitman was explaining to the gathered employees. It's a program designed to ensure that everyone at Skyline Airways, regardless of background, race, gender, or any other factor, has the support they need to soar to their highest potential. On the screen behind him, The initiative's logo appeared, a stylized set of wings with diverse hands reaching upward, forming the feathers. Beneath it, the tagline, "Room for everyone in these skies." Anthony felt a tap on his shoulder and turned, to find Leeway beside him, tablet in hand as always. "The press response is incredible," she whispered. "Every major news outlet is covering the launch. Industry blogs are calling it groundbreaking and a new standard for corporate response to bias incidents. And our stock is up 12% since we announced the initiative last week." Anthony nodded, pleased but not surprised. "And the internal metrics?" "Even better," Leeway reported. "Applications from diverse candidates up 35%. Employee satisfaction scores at an all-time high. Retention rates improved across all departments." "Good," Anthony said quietly. "But numbers only tell part of the story. Watch their faces." Together, they observed the room. Employees were engaged, nodding, some taking notes. But more telling were the smaller interactions. A veteran pilot, offering encouraging words to a young trainee, crew members from different departments exchanging ideas, the easy camaraderie that spoke of genuine connection rather than forced politeness. On stage, Whitman was introducing his three mentees, a young black woman, a Latino man, and an Asian woman, all recently graduated from flight school, all now first officers at Skyline Airways. "These three taught me more than I could ever teach them," Whitman was saying, genuine admiration in his voice. "They reminded me what it means to love flying, to approach each day with passion and purpose, to see challenges as opportunities rather than threats." The young black woman, Tanya Williams, Anthony recalled, stepped forward to the microphone. Her confidence was evident in her posture, in the crisp lines of her uniform, in the clear, strong voice that filled the room. "When I was 11 years old," she began, "I was on a flight where the pilot made an announcement that people like me didn't belong in the cockpit." A hush fell over the audience. "It wasn't Captain Whitman," she clarified with a small smile. "But it could have been. That experience nearly shattered my dream of becoming a pilot." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "What kept me going was my father telling me that one person's limitations shouldn't become my own, that I belonged wherever my talents and dedication could take me." Anthony remembered his own father saying similar words to him decades ago, when the path to corporate leadership seemed impossibly steep for someone who looked like him. "Working with Captain Whitman these past months has taught me something important," Tanya continued. "People can change, perspectives can evolve, and sometimes the strongest allies come from unexpected places." She turned to Whitman with a respectful nod, and he returned the gesture. The genuine connection between them was visible to everyone in the room. As the presentation continued, Anthony slipped out a side door. He had another important stop to make before the day was done. In a smaller training room down the hall, 20 teenagers from local high schools were being given a tour of the flight simulator facilities. Part of the Wingspan initiative included community outreach, bringing young people from underrepresented groups to see firsthand what a career in aviation might look like. Anthony paused in the doorway, watching as the teens took turns sitting in the simulator's captain's chair, eyes wide with excitement as they gripped the controls. One girl in particular caught his attention. About 12 years old, with bright eyes and a determined expression as she carefully followed the instructor's guidance on takeoff procedures. There was something familiar about her. "She's a natural," said a voice beside him. Anthony turned to find the girl's father and suddenly placed them both, the father and daughter from Flight SL-342 6 months ago. The family who had been sitting across the aisle from him when Whitman made his ill-fated announcement. "Mr. Chen," the father said, offering his hand. "I'm David Reynolds. We spoke on the phone a few months back about the tour." Anthony shook his hand warmly. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds, it's good to meet you in person. And that must be Zoe?" He nodded toward the girl in the simulator. "Yes," David confirmed, pride evident in his voice. "She hasn't stopped talking about flying since you invited us here. Has books about famous pilots all over her room now, posters of planes on her walls." They watched as Zoe executed a perfect turn following the instructor's directions with intense concentration. She was pretty upset that day on the plane, David said quietly. Confused, hurt, she asked me if it was true what the pilot said, if she couldn't be a pilot because of how she looks. Anthony nodded solemnly. I remember. I told her it wasn't true, that she could be anything she wanted to be. David paused. But I wasn't sure if I was just telling her what she needed to hear, or if it was really possible, if things were really changing. And now? Anthony asked. David gestured toward the simulator where Zoe was now expertly navigating through a simulated cloud bank, her face lit with concentration and joy. Now I believe it, seeing what your company has done after that incident. It gives me hope that by the time she's old enough to apply for flight school, the sky really will be open to everyone. The instructor was explaining something about navigation systems, and Zoe was asking questions, intelligent, specific questions that showed she'd been reading up on the subject. She's got the aptitude, that's for sure, Anthony observed. And the determination, David added. Once Zoe sets her mind to something, there's no stopping her. Anthony smiled. The best pilots are like that. After the teens had finished their turns in the simulator, Anthony addressed the group briefly, sharing his own journey from baggage handler to CEO, emphasizing that the aviation industry needed their talents, their perspectives, their dreams. The sky has room for all of you, he told them, and Skyline Airways is committed to making sure you have the support and opportunities you need to reach it. As the group prepared to leave, Zoe approached him, hand extended professionally. Thank you for having us today, Mr. Chen, she said. The simulator was amazing. You seemed very natural in there, Anthony replied, shaking her hand. Have you flown before? Just in my dreams, Zoe said with a bright smile. But someday for real, I'm going to be a captain. I believe you will, Anthony told her. And Skyline Airways will be lucky to have you. After the school group had departed, Anthony made his way back to the main event. The formal presentation had concluded, and employees were now mingling, discussing the initiative in small groups, signing up for mentorship opportunities, networking across departments. Li Wei found him by the refreshment table. The board chair called, she reported. She's thrilled with how this has turned out. Says it's exactly the kind of leadership that sets Skyline apart. Anthony nodded, pleased but already thinking ahead. This is just the beginning, he said. The real work happens after the cameras leave and the headlines fade. That's when we'll see if we're really changing the culture. Always the visionary, Li Wei remarked with a smile. Never satisfied with today's success. That's how we grow, Anthony replied simply. Across the room, he spotted Captain Whitman deep in conversation with a group of young mechanics, listening intently as one of them explained something about a new maintenance protocol. 6 months ago, Whitman might have dismissed their input. Today, he was learning from them. People could change. Companies could evolve. Industries could transform. It didn't happen through grand gestures alone, but through daily choices, consistent effort, and a willingness to see possibilities where others saw only problems. As the event wound down, Anthony found himself back at the window overlooking the airfield. Planes took off and landed in a carefully choreographed dance, each one carrying hundreds of lives to destinations near and far. Captain Whitman joined him there, both men watching the aircraft in comfortable silence for a moment. Thank you, Whitman said finally. Anthony glanced at him. For not taking the easy way out 6 months ago, Whitman replied. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself at the time. Anthony nodded. The best leaders don't just manage what is. They envision what could be. I met that girl today, Whitman said after another pause. Zoe, the one from the flight. What did you think? Anthony asked. I think she's going to make one hell of a pilot someday, Whitman said with genuine admiration. Asked better questions about the simulator than some of our trainees. Anthony smiled. She reminds me of someone. Who's that? Me at that age. Determined, fascinated by flight. unwilling to accept artificial limitations. Whitman nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad she won't face the same barriers you did. Some barriers have fallen, Anthony acknowledged. Others remain. That's why this work matters. Why what we're doing today isn't just about Skyline Airways or even just about the aviation industry. It's about what's possible when we choose growth over fear, inclusion over isolation, future over past. Outside, a Skyline Airways jet lifted into the afternoon sky, sunlight gleaming on its wings as it banked gracefully toward the horizon. Room for everyone in these skies, Whitman quoted softly. Anthony nodded, watching the plane until it disappeared into the endless blue. Indeed, and more room every day. On his drive home that evening, Anthony found himself thinking about Flight SL-342, about how one difficult moment had cascaded into 6 months of transformation, not just for Captain Whitman, but for an entire company, for an industry, perhaps, in some small way, for society itself. Change rarely came from comfort. It emerged from challenge, from conflict, from the messy, complicated process of humans learning to see each other more clearly, more completely. His phone buzzed with a text from Leeway. Final numbers from today's event. 94% of employees signed up for Wingspan Initiative programs. Corporate partners requesting information about implementing similar programs. 3 industry publications requesting in-depth interviews. Anthony smiled. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. There would be setbacks and successes, resistance and breakthroughs. But tonight, he allowed himself to savor this milestone, this moment when a problem had truly been transformed into progress. As he pulled into his driveway, one more text came through. This one was from Captain Whitman. Just heard from Tanya. She completed her first solo flight as first officer today. Perfect takeoff, perfect landing. Said to tell you the sky belongs to everyone now. Anthony read the message twice, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction settle in his chest. He typed back a simple reply. Indeed it does, and it's more beautiful because of it.